So in this section, we're going to explore proteins. Proteins is a very interesting section to look at. Proteins actually play an incredibly important role in our body. Pretty much every part of our body requires protein as a building block. It's required for building not just our muscles, but our bones, our joints, and organs, everything. Not only is protein needed for all of that, but it's also required for things like your larger organs, like your skin, in your integumentary system, but also your immune system. Your entire immune system communicates via a lot of protein style mechanisms. So what we need is protein as a building block for pretty much every part of our entire body. Hence why protein is one of the nutrients that we do need to consume, and it doesn't mean that it has to come from an animal source. So there are some people who, for instance, are reactive and are allergic to meat, red meat, and so they can't consume that, and so they actually have to rely on either white meats or fish or other sources of protein. But it's much harder to get quality protein into the body from non-animal sources. That is actually just the reality in many regards. So if we have a look here, in terms of the proteins that we're talking about, their quality, you'll see that the quality proteins that are generally supportive are those that aren't so much processed. So when I say not so processed, it means that they're more in the raw form. Now, one of the exceptions there is the tofu and tempeh. They've been processed quite a bit. But if you look at eggs, meat, poultry, fish, and seafoods, they haven't been so much processed. And they're actually great sources of protein. So you either cook them up and then have them that way. And your body's actually able to utilize protein in a beautiful way in terms of breaking it down and absorbing all the individual amino acids for all the building blocks that it needs. And what we find too is the beautiful thing about proteins is they don't tend to spike our blood sugar levels so much either. So similar to fats, proteins don't tend to spike blood sugar levels, so they tend not to cause a lot of inflammation in the body from that perspective. Some people may find they have to cut out proteins for a while in terms of inflammation of the digestive tract or keeping things very light when they're doing a detox and clearing out, or having to deal with certain bacterial issues in their digestive tract or otherwise. But generally speaking, protein is an incredibly important nutrient for us to have. So tofu and tempeh are actually quite processed, but the reason why I've put them as generally supportive on that left-hand side is particularly if you're on a vegetarian or vegan diet, then tofu and tempeh are one of those that will be very, very high in protein and one of the best sources of protein for you to have. Tofu itself has an amino acid profile that's very, very similar to or closest to, say, your meat and animal sources, and hence why that as a protein source is actually very complete. If we go down to protein powders, they're obviously processed to a degree as well, but I've put them in there as generally supportive for some people because you can use protein powders to support someone who might be losing weight, having digestive difficulties, or wanting to build a little bit their body from another perspective in terms of obviously we're aware of bodybuilders using protein powders, but protein powders aren't limited just to bodybuilders. We use them quite a bit in clinic, particularly to support in certain times and phases of people's lives when they're needing that little bit of extra digestive support. Now, protein powders can come in all kinds of different sources. You've got your egg protein powder, your pea protein powder, your soy protein powder, and you even got a carob protein powder as well. You also have whey protein powder. The problem with whey protein powder is obviously from an allergy perspective, some people can't handle whey because it comes from dairy. And also, it's one that can be a little bit difficult or heavier for some people to digest. That's why it's on the right-hand side with the whey protein powder. It's a great protein source in itself, and technically it's fantastic. When you look at the theory and the content of it, it's great, but it actually tends to cause some digestive issues and can contribute hugely to inflammation as well in some people. So that's why some of the lighter powders, like your carob protein powder, is one that has a lower allergen potential and is quite light to digest. Now, carob protein powder, keep in mind, it's not the carob powder, the brown powder that you buy. It's actually the extract of the protein of the carob bean. It's actually got like a creamy yellow color. Very, very light powder and low allergen potential and quite gentle and easy for the body to digest. So if we look on the right-hand column, we've also got processed meats such as cheap sausages, bacon, bologna, and spam, and all those. They've got lots of fillers. They're not necessarily the best in terms of nutrient content. They've got often smoked flavors to them, flavorings and fillers that are additives, and lots of salt in them and lots of sugar often in them too. Hence why they're not the best sort of source of protein to have. You can get better quality bacon and better quality sausages as well. Sometimes you can even go to the butchers and request that they make you some specialty sausages where they make, you make it out of the pure mince itself, and you might give them some spices or ask for some spices to be added. But they obviously don't have any preservatives in, and they need to be frozen immediately, and they're not the best thing to do if you don't have a good freezer, good quality freezer either. But so it's certainly possible to go for quality sausages and quality processed meats to a degree, but the less processed they are, the better they are for your body. I've also got cottage cheese in there. Again, it's one of those things like your whey protein where it's actually got a really wonderful protein content, but again, coming from an animal dairy source can cause digestive issues and contribute to inflammation for some people. So bottom line with all these protein aspects that we're looking at is there's a lot of good sources of protein. And really the best sources are your animal sources. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. That said, tofu is a really, really good and complete protein source. What I mean by complete protein source is that the body needs a series of different types of amino acids, which are building blocks to make proteins. And so that obviously comes from consuming proteins. When we look at plant sources of proteins, most of them don't have all the amino acids that are needed for our human body to be able to produce what it needs to produce. And so that's why you have to be, if you're going vegetarian, you need to know how to combine things correctly. And that's why if you're not sure about going vegetarian and you're happy to eat meat, then you're more likely to be able to get all the ingredients that you need from the meat or the animal sources, not just meat, but things like your eggs and chicken and fish. Also, B12 is a vitamin that's also found in a lot of animal products, which is important for nerve function and a whole range of other areas too. So there's ingredients that are important to consider coming from animal sources, hence why it's important to just make sure that you're tuning into what your body actually requires and needs to be able to function in its absolute amazing capacity and maximum capacity to work well. Right. I think that pretty much wraps it up for our proteins. So we can say a big thumbs up to proteins as well in terms of everything that it brings to the body.